Okay, there we go. Hi everyone. One more second as I do the final posting everywhere. And this is another Concept Cookie live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. and that's Central Time in America, and that is -5 GMT outside the States. And then I am joined as always by Deandra. Say hi.
Hello, everyone.
And let me just do this last push. And we're ready. All right. Hi everyone, I'm Tim Von Rieden with ConceptCookie.com, and today we're going to be doing the exercise that's currently on Concept Cookie's page. This is exercise 29, and it's going to be about shading and value shading. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them on the side. Deandra will be occasionally looking through them and then sending one my way, or if she can answer it herself. But it doesn't even have to relate to the specific subject matter that we're working on. If you have a question about like concept art, digital art, maybe about finding a job, or just questions in general, feel free to ask them and we will make sure to get to you. And if you can notice, my walls are blank because I am moving this Friday, actually with Deandra and my friend Dan. So next week we will be in a different location, and hopefully I'll be kind of there for a while. So today, let's go ahead and just get right into it. So I'm going to show you guys my Photoshop document. Let me do this. And then also we will be sharing the contest results. So it actually ended in a tie, but I'll show you which one actually ended up winning in the end. Okay, so here is the live stream thing that I kind of just catered to the format that I usually do my live streams in with this bottom bar, but pretty much I took it directly from the exercise. So if you're curious about doing this on your own, or if this is something that might interest you, you can download the PSD on the exercise 29 post on Concept Cookie. And pretty much when you download this, I have it all on different layers so you can hide whichever ones you want. And then I gave little tips, but for the most part, it's a very basic general exercise. So I'm giving these shapes. Let me hide the lighting. And then I'm kind of giving you an angle at which the lighting is hitting this object, and I'm asking you to challenge yourself and then draw on the lighting. Because the more that you think in terms of lighting something, the easier it will be to add value and shape and form to the actual object. So let's go ahead. And actually, this is a good example where if you hide the shape layer, you should still be kind of able to see a presence of a shape. So like the first two, you can kind of see, oh, the sphere is bulging out because we're getting a shadow that's casting onto the rest of the object. So subtle hints like that give the viewer an easier time to recognize what the shape is. I'm going to keep the shape up. We're going to hide that layer. So I'm going to imagine everything in like a grayscale mode. So all my lighting I'm going to do from a value range, and I'll put it on the top here because I know you guys can't see my screen. And I think I'm going to work with the chalk brush today. I've been enjoying using the chalk brush lately. So here's my spectrum from black to white. And I think the best thing that you can do is work more toward the center. So try to avoid using over extremes. And I think that's where you use either too much black against too much white contrast, which, while it does work in certain occasions, the less contrast that you have, sometimes it's the subtlety that will really add that dimension to your shape. So you don't always have to feel like you need to overblast the values to give something shape or form. So that's why when I always talk about a range, everyone thinks that you should be working from white to black. But typically I like to work from like isolated ranges. So from like here to here might be my range, depending on what the surface is or what the material actually is. But since these are kind of like made up shapes, I don't really have like a specific reference I'm going to be working off of. So if it was like a basketball or something, I would be able to kind of know like which range I'm going to be working with. So then that one might actually have some nice highlight like on the dimples of the actual basketball, where the shadows might not be so dense. So it all kind of depends on how you go about treating your object and what kind of material you think about it, or you're going to be thinking about is it's going to be. I'm going to make a new layer here. And the first thing that I recognize is that we have a light source coming from overhead. And since I can see the top of this light box, whatever this little contraption thing that I made up, it's probably a little more directed in the front. So the light's probably hitting the strongest like right here on both of these shapes. So that's something I'm definitely keeping in mind. But to start off, let's just start off with a mid-tone gray. I'm going to make this layer underneath of that shape layer. Now I'm not worrying about if it's looking perfect or how messy it is. I'm only concerned about if I feel like I'm adding values correctly, because all of this excess can be cleaned up later. I think too many artists focus on making everything look perfect from start to finish, and that's very time consuming. Oh, and it looks like Deandra got cut off. Hold on here. I'm going to add her back in here. And if anyone else seems to be having a problem watching the stream, definitely let me know in the comments so I know I'm not just like talking to nobody. Okay, so now from here, and hopefully she will join soon again so that you guys have any questions, I can start answering them. So now that I have my base color set in place, what I'm going to be doing is imagining my light falling on this object and then doing a technique I like to call pillow shading. Actually, I'm going to do it a little more brash since I only have an hour for the stream, so I want to get through as many of these as possible. But if I get to like the box one and I feel like we don't have enough time, I might cut it short. So that's why I'm going to try to work a little faster today. So what pillow shading is pretty much you're shading from the center, and then you kind of do like a gradient outwards. Now, pillow shading is usually a bad thing because it usually represents that there is no light in the actual scene and that it's more of a fantastical lighting situation. But when I treat pillow shading like this, I imagine, okay, the center of the light would be here, and then it would just pillow out to the edges. Now, the one thing that's really important that I really have to keep in mind is that since this first object has what I call an outie, this shape right here would be casting a shadow underneath. So I'm looking at that light direction, and then I'm casting it right onto the rest of the shape, like that. Because light, if something's in shadow, unless if there are two light sources or bounce lighting,
to the edges.
Ooh, Deandra, turn down your volume. What was I just saying? Are you here now?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I think it was because we had the double login. I think we'll fix that then for next week. Are you able to still talk now?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to still select questions?
Yes.
All right, good. So pretty much if there are two light sources in the scene, then maybe I would add some more light underneath here. But if there's only one, there's no possible way that this light would be getting directly or given direct light underneath here. Like I said, you might get some bounce light, but for the most part, it's going to be all in cast shadow. So now I'm going to make another new layer, and I'm going to work on this outie part of the object. So same thing, I'm imagining if the object's being pushed out, it probably hit the strongest, like the most direct point right here, and then it would pillow out to the edges. Or not to the edges, to like the edge of where the light could reach. Because there does come a point, and I forget the specific name, what it's called off the top of my head right now, but there's a point where the light would not reach it anymore, and that's where the shadow would begin. And sorry if some of you guys are having difficulties watching this. We tried doing a double login so that both of us we're both under the same username, unfortunately. I didn't think that would cause any trouble, but it seems like it might be causing a little bit. So next week we certainly won't have that again.
All right, you have a few questions lined up. First one is from Benedict. It was before the stream. He says, how does the color of the light source change the color of the object? And how do you proceed in a picture with multiple light sources?
So in terms of the color of the light source, so don't overthink it. Usually I like to think of it, is it a warm or a cool presence that the light is giving off? Because if the light was like this color, and especially in this case, if it was a yellow, then I would add more warm tones to my object. Now that's not to say I'm going to get carried away or like start adding overlays and like really push the warmth. It'll be felt if you subtly add it. Same with cool lights. Now in terms of, what was the other question then?
How do you proceed in a picture with multiple light sources?
So with multiple light sources, I know the typical light source scene for a concept artist, and I think I touched upon this in one of my basic tutorials. So if this was my scene, we had a character right here. So usually there's a main light. Oops, get a little smaller. There's a main light which casts the main forms of your object, or in this case, your character. There's usually an intense rim light that's being cast from behind, and then you can imagine there's like a giant filler light right in front. And it's really soft and it's really low. And that pretty much makes it so that your shadows aren't quite as intense. So that 3 lighting system is probably the most basic for most concept artists. And when you go about it, you usually just keep each in mind and you work with it. So I know with a lot of like illustration scenes, like if there's a fire in play, like let's say it was something at night, so you're getting the moonlight from behind the character, and then if there was a fire in front of the character, you have to be very conscious of working with both of those lights and making it look cohesive. So you don't want them to fight each other either. You want them to definitely play with each other. And really quick, I'm just going to add just a subtle highlight, giving our object some more of a surface texture to it. Next question.
Let's see. The next one is similar to Benedict's by Fabian H. Is there a method to finding a matching shadow color if I don't just want a darker color of the object color to make a shadow? So for example, a bluish shadow on a green surface object.
Wait, you might have to repeat that one.
Yeah, it's kind of long. So is there, for shadow colors, is there a way to like pick a color that's not just dark but like a different color entirely?
You have to be careful with that. I would say I feel like you don't try to add shadow. Like if something's already in shadow, you don't need to like compile 2 shadows on top of each other. I think the best thing that usually works for me, and I think I didn't learn until like earlier this year, is try using like a mid-tone gray in your shadows. So like have the point where the light can't reach anymore be like the darkest part of the shadow, and I really wish I could remember what that point was called. And then that will be like the darkest part of your shadow, and then from there try using like a mid-tone gray and soften up some of the areas in your shadow. And you might be surprised by how well that actually pops out the colors in the light sources, but also makes the shadows not look so intense and so dark. So that's one way I guess I would go about doing that. Now, really quick, I'm gonna copy what I did for the first sphere over to the second one, since we're working with the same type of light source here. But now, in this case, we're working with an innie, which pretty much means that it's been pushed into the actual sphere. So now this drop shadow or the cast shadow that I had from the first one, I need to cover up. And I need to be more cohesive with the entire piece because there is nothing blocking that light from hitting this sphere. So I'm going to add this back. Now this is where we can have some fun because now we're going to be pretty much doing the opposite of what we did for the first one, where the light source was almost near the top in like the top left corner. Now the light source is going to be the greatest on the bottom right corner, so literally the complete opposite corner. And then we're going to build it up, but I try to like work in the same direct brush strokes as the lighting would be in. Sometimes that gives an underlying impression that's really nice. So then the area near the top, I'm going to really fill in with this dark gray color. So this is a good example of where I'm not going to grab black and like add it in here. Because if my shadow color, which is defined by this cast shadow on this side, is this color gray, I'm going to stick with that same color gray on this side. I think that too many young artists feel the need to increase the contrast between light and shadow. But trust me, the more that I'm watching, even some of the tutorials that we're releasing recently on Concept Cookie, especially the one about minimal value shading from Sam Carr, he really talks about how it just takes a little to make a big impression. So really try on like your next piece just to add a subtle contrast between your lights and shadows. And you might see that, oh, you don't need to make this overly contrasted image. All right, sorry, you can ask another question. That was kind of a ramble.
Ben Sinclair asks, what about lighting with textures? If there is a very rough or bobbled texture, is there a different technique for casting light on it or shadows?
That's a good question, and I think that when it comes down to stuff like that, I would use a different brush. So even like the brush that I'm using right now is giving the texture of this sphere somewhat of an irregular surface, almost like it's been sandpapered down a little bit, like it has somewhat of a grainy look to it. So if I was doing like leather or something, I would probably use a more intricate looking brush rather than just using a standard soft edge or hard edge brush. But a lot of it does come down to where you place your highlights. Because even on like these objects, if I start adding like scale like highlights in different areas, it gives an entirely different impression to the object and the surface material. But yeah, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I would work with a different brush.
By Losky-chan, I find that the switch from traditional media to digital was a bit of a shock to me. I dropped directly onto a screen so I can't cover it with paper, but is there a screen protector that might help change the texture of and glide I get on my screen?
I'm assuming you're working on a Cintiq.
Yeah.
I know there are screen protectors out there. I know my friend Pui has one, but he uses it for his tablet that he draws on. It's usually a very thin, like, it almost looks like a plastic wrap covering, but it works pretty well and it doesn't really affect the sensitivity too much. So yeah, I would look online. There's plenty of them out there, but it's not necessary. I think I need to stress that. Like they definitely built these screens in mind that someone's gonna be, pushing this tablet pen on it like all the time. Like that's its purpose. But if you really feel like you need some kind of a protector, then yeah, they're really cheap too. So you won't break the bank on that one either. All right, I'm gonna move to the next shape now. Well, really quick, I guess. So you can see the difference between the two shapes. So if I hide the shape layer, you can kind of get the the indication as to where the light source is. So if I like hid these light boxes as well, you can still have kind of a sense of where that light is coming from and the kind of object that this is, the kind of form. And you can see that like the left one has an outie and the right one has an innie. So I'm going to move on to the next ones, which talk about curves and edges. So this is a really fun one because, in my opinion, this talks mostly about contrast. Because when you're doing curves, you want the contrast to be minimal, but it's gradienting, if that's a word, into each other. Whereas the edges ones, it'll be really sharp. So while I start to work on this, I can go ahead and answer another question then, Dee.
Alright, by Sarah Wright. For the past couple of weeks, I've been doing a lot of anatomy studies to help with my personal work. Now, for some reason, I just can't get back into drawing my own stuff. Do you ever get this problem? If so, how do you get back into the swing of things?
Yeah, all the time. I think it's like just us, you as an artist, we're constantly changing our opinions on like what we like and what we see and what we want to create. So I think if I ever feel like I get out of the swing of things, I think I just need to focus on what I want to do at that moment. Because I think there's too many times where you get a really good idea and like you put it in the back burner of your mind and it just kind of sits there. It doesn't really do anything until you actually like work with it and flesh it out. It'll always just kind of sit there until you get, if it's like months later, then you don't even really feel like working on it and you just move on to the next back burner, which then that one might eventually fizzle out as well. So I would always just recommend getting it, whatever you have in your mind, done at that moment, because then like a few months from now you might not even like it, or you might not even attempt it, but you won't experience what if you did like that. So like let's say if you did do it and it became like something that you really added to your style, your personal collection of like things you're proud of, like it would be a great achievement. But if you never even started it, then you would never know. So I would just push through it. That's my best advice: is just always push through it if you feel stuck. What about you, Deandra? Because I feel like you sometimes do that too.
Um, yeah, I actually had the same problem when I took figure drawing class, and then it was felt weird to like try to go back and draw like imaginary things and creatures and stuff. Um, I would probably just say what helped me the most is one, you can either just like go like go with it, as Tim was saying, and just keep practicing for your drawing. You know, it's not a bad thing if that's what you feel like doing. But if you really want to get back into doing like a personal illustration, just I would try to get inspired again, maybe by looking at like your favorite artist's work or like just looking at stuff on the internet. You know, that always gets me back in like the mood. Or if I watch like somebody else's stream and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what I want to make. That's what I want to create again. Um, that's what I use personally as like a transition into a different like subject or genre.
hmm
So
Okay, really quick. So what I'm doing on this shape right here, these two shapes right here, is on the right side, I'm imagining that the light source is hitting strongest like right in the center here, based on the direction that's kind of pre-given. And then I'm fading it, I'm grading it. I gotta stop saying that, there's gotta be a real word for this. But I'm adding a gradient from that light to shadow, and then back into light as this curve goes back around, back into the angle that the light would be hitting it at. But then when I'm working on the left side, we're working more with planes. And when you work with planes, it's going to be like a flat surface that reflects the light based on whatever angle it's hitting it at. So like the top of it would be hitting it or receiving that light pretty strong and then reflecting it back. But as in like the second plane right here, it might not even be catching any light. So it might just be completely in cast shadow. So then this point right here, and normally I don't work with line art, that's why this is a little strange for me. Probably I would hide that line art layer, and then I would make this point really intense, because there's got to be a singular point where this edge curves into that shadow, even if it's really small. And that little highlight touch there gives us that impression that this is a hard edge and that it curves very, very minimally. It's a very hard edge into this second plane right here. I'm going to add back on that plane. And then since this bottom plane is pretty much angled almost the exact same direction as this top one, it's going to be colored almost the exact same, the same amount of light. Now depending on how far away the light source is, I'm imagining this one is pretty far away. But if it was closer, then this top one would probably be receiving the light source a little stronger. So then I might add a subtle more gradient on the top here. And then something kind of cool that will add some realism to this. Imagine if this bottom plane was receiving that light, and then it would be bouncing just ever so slightly onto the second plane. So this tells a lot to your viewer too. So you gotta be very careful when you do this, because right away this tells me that this surface, whatever it may be, is more reflective than it does absorb. And you gotta be very conscious of when you add reflective surfaces, because if this was like, let's say, skin that wasn't wet in any way, so it wasn't sweating or anything, it probably wouldn't reflect a light that much. It might reflect just a subtle hint of color, but for the most part, it's going to absorb a lot of that light. So how you bounce light also says a lot about your object itself. And then lastly, before I'll answer more questions, is the side that doesn't receive any light, I'll probably make a little bit darker in shadow. And this will give it that sense that the light source isn't receiving or isn't able to hit any of this side. Whereas the shadow on the curved part is still receiving some bounce light. It might be receiving some indirect light, but for the most part, the one on the side really isn't receiving any of that light source. But I'm still not using black. Like if I put black down on all of this, you can see I'm working very minimally with my grayscale range. And I think that's really important that I keep emphasizing that so that you guys may try that in your next piece. All right, I'll start rambling. What's the next question we got here?
All right. By Savage Shoe, when did you feel comfortable to start doing artwork without the need for pure black line art to make the majority of the form?
I guess the question for... I almost want to repeat that back because I still don't feel comfortable working with lines, and I never did, even when I first started. I would say there was a point where I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to pretend like I am good with line art because I feel so much more comfortable going at it without lines that I never actually felt like I mastered line art or like adding line art to my pieces. So I would say I never felt comfortable. Rather, I moved on to what I was comfortable with and stuck with. And as artists, I think you need to realize that there isn't like one right way to do it. So for me, that worked really well, where I was able to work more with color and value, and I didn't have to worry so much or put emphasis on adding a line art before I went ahead and started. But for some artists, that might sound terrible, and they might love line art and adding, those little emphases on like line weight and stuff like that I really don't do for my pieces. So it really does come to you as a your personal taste and as an artist, because even with Concept Cookie, I try not to teach style because I think that's something you develop on your own in time, and that really reflects you and your interest, and there's so much that goes into it. But rather I want to teach you the fundamentals and what's accurate, because then you can take that and then apply it to your own style. Oof, I'm almost running out of breath here. All right, sorry, next question.
By Primarily Blue, hey Tim, how did you learn to sketch and draw in Photoshop so well? Paint tool size seems to make most of your tools easy from the get-go.
Man, this is another sketching question. I really don't feel like I'm that great of a sketcher in Photoshop. I think on paper I feel much more comfortable. Oh, and this is something you guys should know. So there's different size leads that you can work with, and just if next time you go to an art store, or next time you get pencils, if you're someone that likes to work traditionally, try working with 0.05 millimeter or mm. I'm pretty sure it's millimeter or whatever lead, and I think that can make quite a difference in the way and the amount of detail that you can put into your pieces. Because I just found out over the weekend they also make 0.03 and 0.01, which is insanely small. So I'm going to try those out because I think a lot of times I was just working with the wrong tool. I was working with like a number 2 pencil, and eventually it would get dull, and I would have to like force this kind of thick lead end to do my detailing, but that wasn't really helping. That was actually hindering me from detailing. So sometimes I think it comes a lot down to the tool, but that's traditional. I know you're talking digital. Sometimes I get carried away. When it comes to digital stuff, I think not focusing so much on it helps out a lot. I think too many artists are so paranoid about it, the entire process being like this meticulous step 1, step 2, step 3 to like make their pieces. But often the pieces that I do my best on are the ones that I'm not really following a set guideline or a set like, okay, I got to lay down my base colors first, and I got to build up my lights, and then I have some of them that I kind of stick with, but for the most part, the more that you're open to doing new things or what feels right, sometimes that's like the working on the right side or left side of your brain, whatever it is. Sometimes that works a lot better. So be more free when you're drawing, and I think that'll help you a lot. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to finish all 4 of these little examples, so I'm going to keep moving while I'm answering these questions. So really quick, for these shapes right here, number 3, the light sources are different. So previously we're working with the same angled light source, but for this one, this is where kind of the test becomes more advanced, or the exercise, I should say. So this one, the angle of the light is slightly overhead, so maybe some of this top area would be receiving that light. But then on the second one, that's probably going to be my darkest area because there's no direct light, and there's really almost no indirect light. So for the most part, I'm going to leave that in shadow. But then for this left one, to really indicate that the light source is coming from behind and from that direction, I'm going to do just a slight gradient from a light to a slightly darker gray, just to give that impression that the light source is coming from that direction. And any little hints that you can give to the viewer like that will really help define, okay, that's where the light source is coming from, stuff like that. So I'm going to keep doing that all throughout. Okay, I can do another question.
I think what they meant was how did you get the hang of Photoshop? Just,
I'm sorry. I'm not able to see the questions on these, so normally I'll reread it really quick if it's really long, but for some reason I can't. So I guess the question is, how long did it take me to feel comfortable in? Is that it?
I think that's what they meant.
I'm still learning, where I still feel like I'm getting used to Photoshop. I will say, I call it the hump. And that's when you're first given a tablet in Photoshop, and there's like a 1 month to 3 month hump that you have to get over. And that's where you're learning to be comfortable with your hand-eye coordination, because it is weird. I mean, if you're someone that draws traditionally a lot, you're always looking down at your pencil, at your hand, at exactly where that point of the pencil is, and then drawing that way. But Photoshop and a tablet is much different, because you're looking at the screen the entire time, and you're looking at your brush indication the entire time. And I think learning that hand-eye coordination and just being comfortable with how hard do I push on the tablet and things like that, I think that took like a month to 3 months.
All right. Let's see for the next question. By OMG whatever, LOL. How do you get a shape like a human body without line art?
Without line art?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'll do a little sketch on the side. So if you've been to these live streams before, I always explain I do the backbone, the hip bones, shoulders. So normally I like to work fast, and I like to work with gestures of shapes. So I usually have an indication of how large the figure will be. And then from here, I'll just continue building up those shapes. So I still do line work, but it's not like precise line art. I think there's a difference between doing like a sketchy line thing like this and then doing really clean line art. Because this is more of just a foundation that I'm going to be drawing on top of. So I'm not worried about, the thickness of the weights of my lines and making it look clean and precise. Literally, I'm just using these as almost like a measurement tool for when I do my drawing over. And I think that even drawing the human form, I think that just comes with time. I would say most of my human forms are very similar to each other. That's because I start off the same, I usually work them the same. And I think over time, the more that you draw characters, you'll start to realize you draw characters in a specific way. And then even more over time, you'll start to develop your own personal style. So all my characters, eventually I would hope, look like they're all from the same artist and they all kind of fit into the same style. So I guess this is how I would start my characters. And then from here I would just kind of I don't know if I would block off colors and shapes right away, but something like this. So yeah, I'm going to erase that then. All right, really quick. So then on this right one, so for the left cylinder shape, it's kind of like a cylinder, and if you imagine like pinching the inside, this is kind of the shape that an impression we're trying to give. So I'm always keeping that in mind while I'm laying down my light source. And like I said, I like to kind of follow the direction. So like in this example, I should either be working like left to right, but since this is kind of uncomfortable hand movement on the tablet, I'm going to be working kind of more vertically. And build up that light source up to the edge, even if it's just barely subtle. I want to definitely give the impression, so I can't have the top here be the same color as the top here. Because if I really want to give that indication that the light source is coming from a little down below, having that contrast between this lighter side and the darker side of the top will definitely give that impression where the light source is coming from. Oops.
All right, your next question is from the Baba Cow.
All right.
I think I'm saying that right. Could you use color for one of your examples?
Yeah, I could definitely do that. Let me at least try to get through the boxes first, and then I'll color maybe the top left ones. I think that would be the best example. Because I think I hear a lot of people that like they work in grayscale first and they want to know how to color over it. So I think that would be a great thing to showcase really quick.
All right. Also by Primarily Blue, what type of brushes and or pens do you use in Photoshop to help you sketch? Do you use a default or someone else's brush pack? Are they usually smooth or sharp?
I guess you guys can't see my brushes on here, but I use the Concept Cookie brushes, and those are the only brushes I use. Because I feel like if I'm doing tutorials or if I'm doing things, I definitely want to be able to be like, oh, and you can grab them from here. I definitely do download though other people's brushes. Like I know Loesch just uploaded her brushes to DeviantArt and everywhere. So like I downloaded them, tried them out, and actually two of them are pretty much the exact same of the basic ones I have in my brushes. But I think every now and then experimenting with new brushes is a really good thing because then you might get a new perspective on a brush you really like, and it really works well for you and the results that you want to get. But I would say most of the times I'm using either this chalk brush or a circle hard edge brush, and that's literally for almost everything I do.
By Zero? I'm not sure if that's right either. But their question is, when I get to character design and I'm trying to do some variety on my character, I tend to get caught up in staying with the same designs and shapes. Is there any way to avoid that?
Yes and no. I think it depends on the character that you're creating. Like I know when I'm trying to do different interpretations of my own original characters, they often do fall into the same range of what they look like. But I think the more that you develop your character, so what is their occupation, where do they live, what are their interests, what do they like, I think adding some of that thought process to the characters before you even sketch helps out a lot. Because even things like one of my characters, once I kind of decided he worked on a dock, like then working with that kind of a theme, like working with things that would be present on a dock. So what would like a fishing weapon would probably be his weapon of choice, and then developing different like spears or fishing spears, or the more that you kind of develop your character, I think the more ideas that will just kind of develop on their own. So I would say before you just kind of like just throw things at this character trying to make it look different from one another, really think about who that character is. And I know sometimes that might sound a little weird because obviously these characters aren't real, but they're real to us usually, and especially if they're original characters. And you just got to take the time to really develop them as a solid character. Ooh, actually, I'm really surprised we're moving so fast right now. This is really good. Okay, so really quick. So when I'm doing this, I'm using the technique that I used on part 2. So this is definitely edge heavy. So whereas part 3 was very curve heavy, where I'm working with like a lot of gradients from the light source, this one I'm going to be working more with the edge. So I'm going to be working with more flat planes. So since the light is coming overhead and slightly from that direction, I'm going to lay out my light source and then just ever so slightly give it a gradient so that we know exactly which direction the light source is coming from. Because if it was just a flat gray on top, I mean, the light source could be coming from any direction on the top or literally straight ahead if that's the direction you're giving it. But since we have our light source coming from the side, I need to indicate that somehow. So just having that slight gradient really does help. And now the big challenge between box 1 and 2, because I know it's like they look exactly the same, is that this hole right here, well, you can't even see it, hold on. So the hole that is right here, on one of them will be closed and on the other will be open. So pretty much I'm trying to showcase how light will be able to pass through this open section and it will bounce on these walls, where on the left side we're not getting that at all. It's an enclosed area, so I'm going to be working as if this is going to be primarily in shadow. Okay, sorry, we can do another question.
All right. Okay, by Just Green, my art teacher. All right. My art teacher is making us copy other drawings and pictures. Do you feel this is a good way to learn how to draw, or do you suggest otherwise? I would just like your opinion on this, and what would you do if you were in this situation?
I feel like this is something we get asked almost every week, and for the most part we give kind of the same answers. I mean, Deandra, do you want to get this one?
Sure. So, it's a good thing, I would say. I went through this myself, and I also questioned whether it was a good idea to copy from other artists, since it has like such a negative connotation, copying and stealing. But copying in the classroom setting is not stealing, as long as you're not claiming it as your own and you're labeling it properly as like a study. Like, this is a really good way to learn. Like, you experience when you're trying to like copy someone else's style, like you are experiencing, you're thinking about like how they got to their end product. Like, you are trying to like emulate their lines and their colors, and like it really puts you in like a good habit of like evaluating how to make a piece and like trying to like achieve the same look that they have. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a good way to learn. I refused it at first, but like I learned my lesson, and it's actually helps a lot. Just be sure to like not be like skeezy about it or anything. Be like, this is my original work when you are borrowing from somebody else. Um, and especially like the masters, you know, like Leonardo da Vinci and everyone. Um, they they kind of like paved the way for us, so like we might as well, um, you know, take what they have to give about like learning how to draw. So.
And I would say it's also one of those things where it's like active learning. So you're analyzing a piece and really like trying to figure out how they did it. So you're actively thinking. Where sometimes when we're drawing, we get into such like an autopilot mode that we're not really learning or developing our skills. But sometimes when you're doing that, it's more or less you're training your eye, which I think a lot of artists don't do enough. So when you're
Yeah.
emulating someone else's style, oftentimes you'll see things or like you'll figure out things because you weren't thinking about it before, you know?
It's it's ultimately just like problem solving.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say stick with it and, you know, do what your teacher tells you.
It may seem weird at first, but just know like it will help you and it's not cheating. Okay, so right now I kind of have all this done. So for the boxes here on the bottom, I'm taking that light source and where that light is coming from, and I pretty much made an indication as to where that cast shadow would be because this wall right here is blocking the direction of the light. So it would be casting a shadow. Now I probably want that shadow to be a little lighter just because of the bounce light. And that's where we're getting all the light from the inside of this box. It's all bouncing around. And I think the more that you understand lighting, the more realistic you can get your pieces to be. And even from here, then this is where it's kind of fun. And then if I ever do work with line art, this is what I usually do. I usually draw underneath the line art, and then I block it all out, and then I'll hide the line art. But this is what will make everything look just a lot cleaner. Or if you really wanted to go all out, then I might even like add a shadow, here, and have that kind of fade out. But I think I'm just going to stick with the boxes for now because I definitely want to show how to color something that's grayscale as well. And we might actually make more of an hour time for this live stream. So while I'm doing this, we can definitely answer some more.
All right. By 7 Justice 21, how would you shade a very dark cube? You're rendering light objects, but what about dark ones?
Um, are they saying like if something was completely in shadow, or just like in general if like the cube itself was black?
I think they're talking about if it's completely like in shadow.
So if it's completely in shadow, this is tough because you have to add very, very subtle value changes to kind of give whatever shape or subject matter you're working on form. But oftentimes, I mean, for the most part, if it's completely in shadow, you're not going to get any highlights because highlights are a derivative of a light source. So if there's no light source that is, making contact with your object, then there will be no highlight. So right off the bat, you don't have your like easy fix to give something form. So what you have to do is work with very, very subtle changes, and this almost goes into like ambient occlusion shadows, where those little hints of your value shifts will give the impression of your object. It's very tough. I would say you definitely should have some reference open when you're doing something like that, but it is possible, and you can get the look that you want, but you have to be very subtle about the way you go about doing it. Next question, please.
Yes. See. By OMG whatever again. I noticed that when I shade, I like to erase instead of adding the shading, but I also noticed that it does not appear focused. Should I be adding line to my art to make it look more focused?
Wait, say that one more time.
It might be phrased a little weirdly, but she said, or he, I noticed that when I shade, I like to erase instead of adding the shading, but I also noticed that it doesn't appear focused.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to do it. I do that all the time. Like even right now, technically I'm painting over, but I could also be using my eraser tool. So sometimes your eraser tool can give you really crisp edges. So like let's say I laid out my brush first and I wanted like a sharp edge. I would change to my eraser tool. Oops, there we go. and then erase both sides. Because if I was trying to get like a point like this, it almost looks like a pizza. So if I was trying to like create a pizza shape with just my brush tool, it'd be very tough. Where I'd probably have to make my brush size smaller, or even use like a selection tool, and then do it that way. But I think it saves time and effort if you just use your eraser tool and then point it out that way. So yeah, I definitely think it's a great way about going about doing your work.
Alright. By D. Brown, would you recommend Xeroxing others' work in order to pass that plateau of visualizing higher detail? I practice every day in reference color and light, but I still find myself limited when rendering.
Hmm. So do you think that means like a direct copy? That's what they're asking?
Um, I'm not sure.
I guess it's all about what your intention behind it is. If the intention is to learn and get better, then yes, I think that is a valuable learning way of doing it. But like if it is purely just because you kind of replicate their style as your own, I'm not so sure that that's the right way of going about doing it. So I mean, if you keep in mind that like you're directly copying their style, but it's for the intention that you're trying to learn or maybe pick up something to add to your own style, then I think that is okay.
I think what they mean is like when you get stuck, like it's something that I experience too when I'm working on something and like I don't know how to make it look more realistic. Um, I'll stop and like check out how like other artists do it.
Oh, well, yeah, yeah, that I find
I
fine.
think that's what they mean.
Oh, okay.
Or like it's the same thing with like looking at photo reference. If you're
Yeah,
not sure like, where to go next, it's always okay to do research.
actually, that is like exactly using reference. I
Hmm.
think artists need to get over that whole stigma of using reference as cheating. There is definitely a way of using it that I like the word skeezy that you used, Yonder. That's very skeezy. And I wouldn't recommend just like painting over a reference, even though sometimes that's how the industry does it. But I think in terms of like learning your personal individual skill, that is not going to one bit. And I think having reference on the side and being able to analyze, like you observe your reference and you're like, okay, especially when drawing like facial features, I feel like using reference is such a great tool to help you because then you can look at it, you can look at the shapes and forms, you can look how like it treats lighting and stuff, then you can try to replicate that and mimic that on your own characters or whatever face that you're working on. And that is when reference is great to use. But if you just literally pulled it into Photoshop and then like colored over, you're not really using an active mind to look at it. You're not developing any skill. Rather that you're just developing how to cheat yourself in the long run. And I think that's something you gotta be aware of.
By Skipter, what kind of tablet Wacom pen tips do you use?
I'm trying to think of the one I have right now. Mine's just the basic plastic one. I have used one that had a spring in it, which was really cool. And then I tried using the paper one once, but I didn't really like it against the tablet surface. So I usually stick with just the basic nibs that Wacom gives you right from the get-go.
Is it possible to work completely without line art?
Yes. I almost don't even want to say anything more, but then yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess just know if you are not comfortable doing line art, or you feel like you like if you're like me and you feel much stronger in your coloring or in Some other aspect, don't feel like you have to be tied down to having to add line art. I would definitely say, I mean, attempt it, like give it a chance. I think if you don't even give it a chance, that's not healthy either for your span as an artist. But yes, you can totally create something without any line art.
Some people, I know a lot of people work directly just from like shapes. They just block in the shapes and go from
Mhm.
there.
I was about to bring up Puichi and how he just throws like a clutter of nonsense on his canvas right away and like organize it and finds form and shape that way.
Hmm.
Yeah, and there we go. So now we have all of our objects all kind of edged out. So then I know we're at our hour mark, so if you guys have any last minute questions, feel free to add them now and we'll kind of powerhouse through them the best we can. But I'm also wanting to show you guys how I would go about adding color to this. So I'm going to just focus on these spheres in the corner here. Yeah, I'll make it a little smaller actually. Alright, so then I'll just do a quick demo and then I'll color over it, but then I'll answer any questions that you guys might have. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer on top of these spheres. Then I'm going to change that layer mode. Let's try hue. So usually either hue or color will give me the best results. So I'm going to work with red first. Or no, sorry. Change your first one to color. And that's what will give you this. And then I'm going to also place... So this is the color that I'm working with. So when you change your layer mode to color, this is the result that you'll get. And then oftentimes you'll be like, well, that looks super saturated and light. Well, we can fix that. But I just want to show you guys first what this does. So now if we changed it, oops. I'm not sure why hue isn't working for me right now. Hold on. Because usually it's, I work with a combination of a hue layer. Oh, that's right. What am I thinking? It's in grayscale. So when you make a new layer and you change it to hue, literally it'll keep the values that you have in place, but it'll just change the hue. So that's why when I draw over anything, it'll change its hue, but it'll still keep the value. So that's why when I drew over this red here, I'm still keeping the value of the value of the initial red, but the hue changed. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. That's why when I draw over grayscale, we're not seeing any difference because there is no hue really to work with. It's in grayscale. So, all right, back to my color thing. All right, so this I'm going to change to color again. All right, so it's super saturated, and that's not exactly what we want. So what I would do is I would probably change to a different red, so something like this. And it'll give us just a subtle difference, but it's definitely less saturated. Because when you're doing this, you have to be very kind of aware of practicing doing this. Now, since I don't normally work in grayscale and then add color over, this is definitely a technique that I use every now and then, but it's still somewhat new to me. But pretty much what I like to do is then build up these lighter reds where the light source is, and then kind of leave those shadow reds that same color. So then from here, I would probably do some hue shifting into like more warm colors. So I'm pulling from that light color that we have. I'm going to lay that right on top as well. And that's where we might get some good hue shifting, and it will give more of that warmth of the color that we're wanting right now. But let's say, well, that's great and all, Tim, but I still don't like how light it looks. Well, then I would probably have to actually change the values of my initial spheres. So then what I'm doing right now is, I know you can't see it, but I'm opening up my hue and saturation menu, and I'm only affecting the lightness of the sphere. And that's what will make the initial foundation or the base of the sphere darker. So that way when I go in and I add these colors on top, that's why you can get those darker feels to it. So then from here, I would probably go in and add some more of this lighter red. But then I also think it's important that you don't just rely on color layer modes. I think it's good then if you go in and then add in some of your own normal layers on top. So I'm going to do it really quick here. You can kind of see the impression that that will make. And then still pillow shade it out. So it all just kind of depends on feeling it out and seeing if something works for you. But if you really don't like working in color from the get-go, just know you can definitely work in grayscale first and add color after. But also keep in mind that you're going to have to practice what technique works best for you when transferring over from grayscale to color. Because for me, this works kind of well, but this may not work very well for you. And there are plenty of other techniques you can do to get that transition. So just, be open to trying out some different techniques, some newer techniques, and then always keep in mind of that light source and keeping it consistent. Because oftentimes when people add color, they lose those values that they laid out so delicately beforehand. And that's where I need to go in and really make sure I'm not losing any of that form when I add that color. Okay, so now I'll answer those questions. So rapid fire them out, and I'll try not to give like long explanation answers. I'll try to keep them more short.
Okay. Alright, we'll start from the top. By Ben Sinclair. I give myself a small environmental concept art piece, but when I've got the thumbnail done, I find it hard to get into the piece from there. Any tips?
Ooh. I would say it's definitely good not to rush it and be very conscious of how you're laying out even those initial thumbnails. Like, is it a strong silhouette? Is there a strong shape language that can be read? And then when you're developing them, not losing that initial impression that you're trying to give off. Because oftentimes when you add color or value to a thumbnail or something, you lose a lot of the strength of that initial impression. So I think you have to be very careful and conscious of keeping that presence that you initially wanted still there and recognizable. And I guess it's a hard question to answer without actually seeing it, because if you gave me an example of something, I would kind of be able to tell you more easily how I'd go about treating that.
Alright. By Just Green. When I begin to draw something after being inspired by another artist's artwork, I can never come up with my own ideas, and I feel as if my ideas are not to the standard to what I would like to achieve. Do you know if there's any way to overcome this problem?
Yes. I almost want to link you a Vimeo video. It's the one that, DeAndre, I think you were the first one to send this out. It's called Bridging the Gap, I believe, or just The Gap.
Yeah.
Where it talks about where like you have high taste, but you're not able to replicate that on your own. And that's where it literally just takes practice and to develop it. Because eventually, what's good is right now you have good taste, which is good. You're just not able to create that level of talent that you are interested in. So the more that you work toward it, eventually you'll bridge that gap. And that's, I think, if you go watch it, I'm pretty sure it's called The Gap or Bridging the Gap, something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that would be my answer to that one.
Okay. Next we have, by Primarily Blue. Do you think learning to draw realism first is the best way in order to understand exaggeration, like manga or cartoons?
Yes. Yep, like 100%, yes. I think oftentimes, especially with like anime artists, they're very defensive when it comes to like, oh, you should learn realism first, and then they don't feel like it applies. But those that I've talked to that were really interested in like cartoonish forms or something that wasn't realistic once they took the time to really develop their realism skills, it fully transitioned into the way they did their animated looking characters. Because oftentimes when you really develop a sense of understanding like anatomy, muscle, and structure, that will translate into even anime, even though like anime characters oftentimes have very simplified shapes. Just even proportions oftentimes can be learned just by doing realism studies first. And even I think Deandra, you probably know more about this than I do, just from um, maybe the friends that you had in college as well.
Hmm. Um, I don't know what to add to that, but yes.
Same kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes is the answer to that question.
It's always easier to simplify down than try to add to something that's already simple.
Hmm.
Um, alright, by Ayub Mool. When do you know that you are a true professional artist?
You don't. Even though I still don't feel like I'm a professional artist, even though I'm sure, like, I'm sure, like me 3 years ago would be like, well, yeah, you have a full-time job and you're doing art. So I guess it's really hard to define it, but I think once you're getting paid to do it, you can be considered a professional. But it's still really tough on when I would consider myself a professional, because I always 10 years down the line consider myself a professional, because oftentimes when you consider yourself a professional, I think you get stuck into the mindset of, well, I'm good enough. Well, I don't ever want to be good enough. You always want to be striving to be something better than what you are at the moment.
By Ben Sinclair. Can we email you questions to attach images and stuff?
Yes. Rather than emailing though, send it to my personal Facebook account. That's probably where I get the most fan mail, or like the most fan critique stuff that I do. And I usually do it once a week, so I won't, if I don't get back to you right away, it's just because I don't check it every day, and I don't. Oftentimes, I just don't have the time to do the paint overs every day. So usually, I'll set like an hour on a Sunday, and I'll just go through all of them. So if you have an image that you'd like me to critique over, yeah, definitely do that. But I guess this is also the time I should mention the workshops are that I've been talking about for like the past month. It's pretty much all complete. We just got to finish the website stuff, and it'll be announced very soon. So if this is something that interests you, definitely be very aware that you can sign up in the next. Well, I'm not going to give a specific date, but just know it's coming up. And I can, well, you know what? I can show you the finished billboard that I made. Let me go ahead and find it really quick. And pretty much what this workshop is a very intensive 5-week program where I will be working with 25 students, and I'll be working with them to develop their skill level. So if this is something that interests you, definitely stay tuned for that. There we go. Okay. So the workshop is called I Can Draw Anything. And pretty much what the purpose of this workshop is I'm going to be working with you not so much to just develop your skill level, but to develop how you look and analyze art. Because I think a lot of the time, the most important thing is really developing your eye. Because once you start to analyze and observe things differently, you're able to interpret how to go about drawing things. Because even things like an environment, I don't feel comfortable drawing environments yet, but I can draw everything in that scene individually. It would just take me a really long time. So I think environment artists have a different way about going about their drawings than I do. So I would have to learn how they go about doing it and then apply that to my own work. And I think having that level of self-awareness is what is really important for artists to have. So that's why this workshop is called I Can Draw Anything, and I hope that I will be able to pass along that mindset to you to the point where you will feel confident in thinking, I can draw anything. So stay tuned for that. And if there are any questions, let's get maybe 3 more in, Deandra, if you can find 3 really good ones.
Alright, this one has +3. While learning anatomy, I don't understand the proportions of the face. When I try without a reference or a guide, seems off in the final. Do both of you have any tips on how to fix this?
Yes. Definitely having reference open is really nice, but you really have to develop like simple tricks that you can always keep in the back of your mind. Like something I always know. So let's say this was my head here. All right. So when you're drawing your face regions, the eye level should always be, or not always, but in general, the length of the head. If you cut it in half, that's where the eye level should be. And then from here, once you get your eyes kind of laid out, you can be like, okay, I got my eyes laid out. So then from here, I know that the nose will be in between, and usually the ridge of each nostril will come about to where the muscle tissue is in the eyes, or even a little extended. So then I know that. And the other thing I know is that usually what is considered normal is the pupil. If you bring that line straight down on the actual face, so if this was like a side view, you'd bring it straight down from the eye level, is usually the pockets of each eye. So then from there I can fill in my guy's smile. And now obviously this is a really terrible sketch, but having little tricks like that, or even like the ear, it's usually from eye level to the bottom of the nose. So something like that. And I think just having these simple little guidelines, that you can kind of pull from, and having that be able to be in your like stash of knowledge in your mind bank, that's really important. So that just takes time and really analyzing and hearing what other artists have to say about developing facial structures. What would you say, Dee?
Along the same lines, complex structures like human anatomy can like scare you off easily. But if you simplify it down to like, okay, this just 3 shapes put together, then like it doesn't seem as scary anymore. So just like using those little tricks that like Tim showed you helps a lot, and just memorizing those will help a lot. That's the only, like, just studying that's the only way that you can like eventually understand proportions of like the face. It's not easy, but there are ways to make it easier, and it's just those simple little things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Just breaking up the face into sections and like using like a reference point, like the eyes are this far from each other, and they're in the middle of the head, and the nose is this far down. Like just using those things is the most you can do.
All right, let's take one, and then we're gonna cut off the stream here.
All right. Is it possible to call in to ask questions? Wouldn't that be easier?
No. Just because I'm usually working during the day, and sometimes I'll get a conference call out of the blue, so if I was on the phone with someone else, it might not be the best case scenario.
I think they mean during the stream.
Yeah, during the stream's a really great time, or even during, like, if you do sign up for the workshop, I will definitely give you personal one-on-one attention, and I think that's where I can dedicate my time. Just, it's really hard. If I was open to anyone and everyone, then I don't think I'd be able to answer everyone, and I'd feel bad. But that's why I'm going to be giving the individuals in the workshop more attention.
I think they mean if it's possible to like actually call into the stream and like ask themselves their own questions instead of like me reading them out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Google Hangouts probably isn't the best for that kind of feature, but maybe in the future, if we finally change over to a different live stream service, then we might do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as of now, no. Okay. Oh, you know what? Really quick, I also have to announce the winners of the contest. Okay. So I'm not going to showcase who won first, second, third, or the community, just because I don't have the post done yet. So I'm going to do that in it'll probably be up in like an hour. But what I can show you is the winner. So this came down to 2 pieces. So I'm going to pull those both into Photoshop really quick. And these 2 literally had the same number of votes. So it came down to the plunge, which is this one right here. And this was done by Roidu Kun, and I hope that's correct. And the other one was done by an artist I know whose name is Puichi. And these received literally the most number of votes from the Cookie Crew members, but there was one that received 3 first place votes, where the other one received 2 first place, but they still gathered the same amount of votes. So the winner of the Summer Cookie Contest is this one. So I want to congratulate my friend Puichi. He did a beautiful job with this impressionistic style interpretation of the cookie logo and changing them into the hedges. And it's kind of sweet because each sheep was released 2 years ago. And if you guys don't know what that is, that's what these little monsters are. CG Cookie developed its own little iOS game, and it was called Eat Sheep, and released it 2 years ago. It was one of those things that we all wanted to do as a team, so it was really nice. But I really like the subtle hints of detail that he put everywhere. From even, it was even like a nod to Howl's Moving Castle, which was really nice with the spinning door. But not only did he have it land on like the concept cookie green, but then he also took into consideration the other colors of CG Cookie, like having the Max Cookie and Sculpt Cookie with the different colors. So I thought that was one of those really nice touches that he added that I really enjoyed. And obviously just his use of color and mood, it's very, very strong. So I want to congratulate Puichi, and if you guys are interested in knowing the other winners and the other ones that will be accepting awards, I will be working on that post literally as soon as this live stream ends, so stay tuned for that later today. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming to this live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. And I try to keep them an hour, but they always go over. I think eventually I'm just going to say they're an hour and a half long from now on. And next week I'll usually post a link to the live stream as well as let you guys know what I'll be working on during the day. And lastly, if you guys are interested in that workshop, just know I'm literally leaving for Illinois tomorrow to finish up working on the workshop. So hopefully we'll have it announced within the next couple of days so you can pre-register. All right, guys. I want to thank you again. And Deandra?
Goodbye, everyone.
See you guys.